I'm going to go ahead and ask Sean McCoy. Go ahead and log on here, brother.
I think Sean, can you see me?
Is a great man of God that has a wonderful podcast. Man, I had him on. I was on his podcast, and then I had him on mine. His podcast is called "Come to the Table." Now, picture this: you're in a kitchen, sitting down at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and you're just talking. That's Sean's podcast. Amen. I mean, that is a great concept. It's awesome. Sean, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Elizabeth. In your own words, you tell us, who is Sean McCoy?
I'm just somebody out here who loves God, who loves to follow Jesus, and just believes in the community that we have between people and the synergy we have between people, and who believes that with community, however we can get it, whether it's through social media, whether it's through technology, or in person, that it's valuable and it's critical for us to come together, both in times of plenty and in times of need. I would say that's who I am.
Amen. Amen. We're getting a little wavering, just a little bit in your mic. Okay. I don't know if it's on your end or ours, but hey, we can still understand everything you're saying. I'm just saying it just sounds just off just slightly.
Okay.
But go ahead and say something else to see if it cleared up.
How does this sound here? The quick brown.
There you go. Yep, that's good. Yep, that's good. Okay. All
Sounds
right.
Good.
So I'm going to log out. It's all yours, brother. You're on.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to try to go to the screen and share my screen, because what I'm wanting to do ultimately is I'm going to talk a little bit about where I come from in terms of this charge, this invitation that Pastor Bob was so gracious to put out to me, to ask to be a part of this, to be able to share something that gets everyone out there a potential for an opportunity for us to come together and to take into this situation, and to at a time like this, how do we react? What can we do, and how do we do that? The way that I find strength in those areas is through stories, and through stories that I've heard. And so we're going to go through some stories, some old and some new. And before we start that, though, I want to ask everybody that's listening, there's a lot going on. So there's a lot going on with this entire process. And I want to think about Psalm 46:10. Which simply tells us to be still and know that I am God. And so as we go in, I want that to be the starting prayer. Just ask everyone to take a moment to be still and remember that God is with us. So as we go forward, again, I'm thankful, and my hope is that we can provide an opportunity for some stories and some opportunity for some things that allows us to believe and to remember that we're not alone, and that this is a journey. And so I'm going to invite you to join me on this recollection of some stories. I'm going to share my screen as we go through this. Make sure this works. And so as we get started, I'm going to start with the book of Daniel. Set the stage for this. If you imagine way back, the Babylonians had come in and conquered Jerusalem. And as they did, they set up shop, much like an uninvited guest, much like maybe a virus, maybe something that comes into our home, comes into our lives, uninvited and unwelcomed, but now is part of our lives, and we have to deal with it. And during that time, Daniel and three others, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, became part of the king's court. They became part of his entire world as the king decided to try to, how is he going to rule over these people? And as the story starts to go through the book, we get to the second and third chapters, and the second one starts to go through the process and the issues that most tyrants have. And King Nebuchadnezzar was no different than anybody else that uses fear and shame to control. It's not real. It's not something that you can sustain. It's constantly a point of contention, whether or not you're going to have the opportunity to stay in power, because you're kind of there almost in a facade. You came there unrighteously in terms of your where you are and all of that. And so as any good tyrant, if you will, sits there and goes through this, he starts to get a little bit insecure. And Daniel starts to read his dreams, and he starts to go through these things. And so let me set the stage a little bit more, in that as he goes through this time of insecurity, as dictators do, and as people in places of authority do, that completely use power and force and stuff of that nature, he decides to go against this dream that Daniel tells him about. He says, hey, God's telling me you need a little bit of humility. You need a little less hubris. And that's very difficult for those that are in power and control, because there's something about it that we want. All of us want this ability to make everything go the way we want it, especially at that level. And so as he goes through this, Daniel tells him, you need to be humble. And he doubles down on his bet. And he says, no, no, no. I'm going to make sure that everybody loves me. I'm going to make sure that they do it. I'm going to build a huge statue to myself. And I'm going to force the people to come out and tell me how much they love me. And I'm going to force them to tell me not only that they love me, but they love you. They love me more than your God. So then the issues come in. So then comes the crux. Then comes the first part of Daniel 3, where it becomes, what do you do when you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And this tyrant gives you an option. And he says, you're going to have two choices. You can either tell me that you love me. You can bend the knee. You can decide to come and say that you worship me more than anything else in the world and you love me more than anything else in the world, or else I'm going to throw you in a pit of fire. Because in the end, there's a reality part here. There's things that we believe in. There's things that we can't really we can't really show, we can't really prove. And Nebuchadnezzar's using the whole card. And he's saying, look, that's all together great. But understand that if you tell me you don't love me, I'm going to throw you in that really real fire over there. And it's going to really kill you. And I'm telling you, you either bow down and love me more than God, or I'm going to put you in that fire. That is the issue. That's the crux of it, because now Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are forced to walk into a situation that they can't control. They're forced to walk into a thing that could cause all kinds of issues. And as they go through this, they realize really quickly that, hey, we could be in a lot of trouble here. And they're concerned, and there's some fear there. But then they decide the result. What are they going to do? What is the answer they're going to give King Nebuchadnezzar? And they tell him, as he sits there and almost ridicules them in further God, and says, you know, I know you love God, but let me tell you, that fire is really, really hot. And I'm going to make it even hotter if you tell me no. And so as they stand there in front of Nebuchadnezzar, in front of all these people, in front of the kingdom, in front of their very lives, and he's telling them, you either bow down or else. They recognize and they say, you know what, King Nebuchadnezzar? Yes, it is true. God could save us. But if not, but if God does not, if God says no, we are still going to love him. And I can tell you on a personal level, came through, is that when I remember reading that for the first time, to have that kind of courage in the face of the unknown, in face of not, sometimes we get really excited because we know the rest of the story. And they said, but if not, we are still going to love God. And even if God doesn't save us, that is not a condition of our love for him. It is not an if and then for us. And so I'm going to leave the rest of the story to just be there in case you don't know it. Because I think it's really important at this point to stay in the moment and not get to the end so fast, but to stay with the but if not, to know that at that moment, they did not know how the story was going to end. And as a result of that, as this story has taken on maturity, what has been the end result of all of this? How has the world used this going forward? In this particular story, Daniel 3 has become a focal point going forward for 2,000 plus years. It's been a part of the Bible. It's been a part of this ancient lore that continues to live on. We're talking about a story from 2,000 years ago that comes to us and is showing us that in a time of trial, in a time of need, that it's very easy to know how to act when it's over. But in the middle of that fire, in the middle of that potential, are we going to have the courage? Do we have the ability to step into it and say, yes, you're right, something could happen, but and God could save us, but if not, we are still going to love him. And so what I like to do as well, there's the stories of ancient, but there's also stories of the modern day. And there's a couple of people that I interviewed in my podcast that I would love to share with you today. A couple of stories that stood out that I feel are a little bit like Daniel's story, a little bit like Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego's story. And I want to start with my friend Chad Moreau. Chad's sister Shanda, her husband Jordan, Cameron, and McGuire were their children. And let me set the stage. Chad got a phone call one day in 2016, and he got the kind of phone call you never want. There had been an accident. Something had gone wrong. And he had to rush over to find out exactly what had happened. And so as the details came forth from the accident that the family was in, he found out that two of them had passed away immediately, and two were in critical condition. Both his sister and his brother-in-law had passed away. And as the news of this started to go through, the issues they started to work through, the other two, the two babies were still alive, Cameron 5, McGuire 2. And they had to make a decision when it came to Cameron. There was an opportunity to donate her organs. As all this is rushing in, this sudden, overnight, just out of nowhere, complete 180 in your life happened. And they found out more information as they started to go through this. They're trying to process the fact that two of their, one of his closest friend, his sister, his brother-in-law, who he loved as much as anybody can love a brother-in-law. They were close. They had to go through all the process of this. As this request for organ donation came in, as all these details of the accident came in, they had these issues they had to work through. And one of them was what to do with Cameron, because they had an opportunity to donate her organs. And in the middle of this storm, in the middle of this difficulty, they had a choice, and he had an opportunity to walk into this and what they were going to do. They donated her organs. Shortly after that, McCoy, in his arms, in the midst of all this, passes away too. And within a very short period of time, 4 members of his family were lost. That is the struggle that they do. And going through all this and how to deal with it. And now that was just the beginning of this long and perilous journey for him. And as he went through his healing factor, as he went through his, whatever you want to, I don't even know if healing is the right word, but as he went through his journey to turn around and understand what is it that he's supposed to do, he stumbled across a website one day. And in the comment string was all these comments about this story, about his wife's story, his family's story, all these people in his family that he had loved. And as he was going through this comment section, there were people that he realized that were the daughter of the person that was driving. You see, it was a drunk driver that killed them. A drunk driver, which means, yes, this was an avoidable accident. This didn't have to happen. And the driver who had been intoxicated walked away from the scene with no injuries. And she was on trial for prison. She was in prison on trial, hadn't been sentenced yet, hadn't been found guilty, but was going through this. And her family members were on this comment string, and they were talking about all this, and everybody was going back and forth. And there were people telling her family members how terrible she was and all the rest of these things. And in the midst of this, Chad saw an opportunity to step into something that he wasn't, in addition to this other thing that he had stepped into in terms of suffering of that nature. He saw an opportunity to forgive. He saw an opportunity to come in there and come alongside and say, hey, this isn't how we're doing things. We're not going to do things this way. And what this makes me think about in terms of what we're doing now is there's an element as we go forward in all of this. There's going to be a time for us to forgive. There's going to be a need for forgiveness going forward in the struggle we have with this current pandemic. What does it take to forgive? Somebody had a wrong idea. Somebody made a wrong comment, wrong decisions, wrong. There's going to be a level of forgiveness out there that we're going to have to find in amongst this terrible, terrible situation for Chad and his family. He found the opportunity for forgiveness. And what that's led to, what that has recreated in him is he's written a book. He's gone on podcasts. He's actually become friends with the family members of the woman who was driving the car that killed 4 of his. And he will tell you in a heartbeat how it's completely changed his life, how it's been there's been an answer to the situation where he didn't know how he was going to walk into this situation where death had come knocking on his door. Now, the beauty about forgiveness, and this isn't to say that we have to forgive, is that we have the choice. We have the choice to step into that if we want to or not. And Chad did that for him and his family. The other story I want to talk about that comes from my podcast is a young lady named Fabi Powell and her husband, Josh. So it's an amazing boy meets girl story. The one that we always think about, the one we see in movies actually happened. She was in Nashville from her home in California on a girls' weekend. He had just got there he just graduated West Point Military Academy. He was going there for his first duty station, literally in a restaurant from across the room. They catch each other's eyes. They see each other and they look and they say, and it's one of those magical moments. She knew right away that there was something there. They started to talk a little bit, and then they spent the next 8 weeks after she went home talking every day and getting to know each other and just stirring and stoking those fires that are just part of that love story that we all think about that they had at that moment. And then 8 weeks in, short 8 weeks into their story, she got a phone call from him. He was sick. He'd gotten diagnosed with synovial sarcoma. It's an extremely rare and very deadly cancer. And just 8 weeks after this, he was giving her an out. He said, you don't have to walk into this with me. I know that it's been special. I know it's been amazing. He even told her that his feelings for her went beyond anything that he had felt for anybody else. But he understood it had only been a little bit of time and that it was okay for her to walk away. And Fabi chose, no, I'm going to step in to this unknown. I'm going to step into this struggle that I have. I don't know what comes. I don't know what the cancer diagnosis means, but I'm going to walk into this because I love you, is what she told him. And love doesn't have conditions. And so she stepped into this unknown with him to go through this. And a year and a half of fighting cancer, back and forth, all kinds of things that go with that. He was given the word that everybody listens for in terms of cancer, which was remission. And shortly after remission, he got down on a knee and asked her to get married. And they set their wedding date for a year later. And I think of this love in the face of death that she had, that love loves even in the face of it. And I think about now, and I think about the doctors and the nurses that go up every day and they decide to love. They step into the fire. They step into what we're doing right now with this pandemic, as they do every day. And they say that, no, we're going to love first, even in the face of harrowing situations. Now, the story with Fabi and Josh was after remission, a few months later, 6 months later, the other word comes back, and that is relapse. One of the other R words. In that relapse, they were told that there was pretty much no chance that he was going to make it till their engagement, from their 1 year from their engagement date, a year later to get married. And they suggested that they go ahead and get married now. And she turned around and got married, and they had a beautiful ceremony. And for 30 days, they were husband and wife. Now, after all of that they went through, what did Fabi do with it? What has she done with this story, and how has she gone forward? She's done a tremendous amount. She's gone and written books. She's gone and going on podcasts. She started a foundation called the